Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. Every month, we discuss the area's top restaurant openings with our friends at Sauce Magazine. But this month, we're doing something a bit different. We're taking a look back at some of the saddest closings. Here to discuss this very sad topic is Catherine Klene. She's the managing editor at Sauce Magazine. Catherine, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Meera Nagarajan, the artistic director at Sauce Magazine. Meera, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Catherine and Meera, last month when we were discussing Sauce Magazine's 20th anniversary, Meera, you were actually there for this.
Oh, yeah.
We were joined by acclaimed St. Louis chef Bill Cardwell, and we asked him for his thoughts on the St. Louis restaurant scene right now, and he had what I thought was a very interesting answer. Let's listen to that exchange. Let's talk briefly about the state of the St. Louis restaurant scene today. Bill, what are your thoughts? Where do you see things going in the coming years based on this moment that we're in right now?
Oh, boy, that's a tough question. Is there room for everybody?
Yeah, there are like a lot of restaurants opening every month.
I think that, it's not just easy, I'm going to open a restaurant. I mean, and so many young people have worked for me that have moved on and been successful. Some have had not success, not because they weren't talented, but just whatever the economics of it, or location, or partnerships, or there's lots of different reasons. So the future is, I think it'll continue to grow. I mean, there are people all the time that want to put restaurants in. I mean, I'm approached multiple times a week since I closed Plaza Frontenac.
That answer, is there room for everybody? Mm-hmm. That part of it, it's interesting because talking to people in the restaurant business in St. Louis, I do hear some concern that we're in some sort of restaurant bubble, and that now that food has become, as we talked about, this evolution over the last 20 years, everyone in St. Louis now considers themselves a quote-unquote foodie. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think, I should open a restaurant. And maybe more places have opened than the market can sustain even. Is that something that either of you hear as you're out there covering the scene, that people are concerned there's just too many new restaurants?
I think some chefs have mentioned that, where they say that the competition for a certain select dining base is more fierce than ever. I mean, Publico, when they closed, said that, there's a lot of restaurants out here and the scene is changing constantly. And I think some people are responding to that by changing the location that they're selecting. More and more people are going west. I've noticed Nudo House and, places like that are venturing out to Creve Coeur and Kirkwood and stuff like that. And I think that's part of, adapting to a concentrated city.
Look at the growth in Webster Groves in the last few years. It's really exploded with new and unique independent restaurant concepts. And I think that's a really good point, Meera, that people are really kind of not just looking at downtown and Central West End and Clayton and these sort of really, really saturated areas. They are trying to branch out into other areas to kind of make their mark.
And it's interesting, when I meet friends for dinner in the county, it seems like no matter what place we're going to on a Saturday night, there's an hour-and-a-half wait,
Absolutely.
Which we don't see in the city. So maybe that's the untapped market. There's still room for more out there.
It's definitely, it's definitely possible. I know, Meera said, Creve Coeur. I feel like we've posted a bunch of scoops this year about new locations opening in Creve Coeur, new concepts opening in Creve Coeur, Kirkwood, Webster, even up toward the St. Charles area. We were seeing a lot of that, and I think restaurateurs are starting to respond to that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, we polled our listeners on which places they missed the most, and we got a huge response to this. People really miss some places that have closed. I'm just going to read a few highlights. Diana said Copperman's, Duff's, Zoe's Pan Asian Cafe. That's going way back, but certainly was very popular. Memphis Expat said, if we're talking not so recent, Stellina. Mm-hmm. If recently, Remy's. James said something that's very near and dear to my heart, Terrine. I'm still so sad about Terrine. DTSJR said, again, Remy's. Mm-hmm. Milagro, that's a sad one. Riddles, which I'm not familiar with.
Riddles.
Riddles. Oh,
yeah.
Maybe he misspelled it. Yeah. And Cardwell's, which Bill Cardwell is a much-loved chef. Jen wrote Grove East Provisions. I miss the chicken noodle soup, the club sandwich, and the brunch.
Aww.
That's a very sad one. And Amy said Reed's American Table in Maplewood.
Yeah.
Now, I know that is on your list of some of the places this year that Sauce feels very sad about. Tell us what happened with Reed's.
I don't exactly know the precise reason for closing, but I think a lot of restaurants were opening up in that area. You look at Elmwood, Benevolent King, what was that, Thai Table across the street. And again, it's like Maplewood it's such a popular area now, and so many restaurants opened up within a short span of time, and it's that competition thing I think has something to do with it, I'm sure. And also they had this like dream team of like people, and I don't know what the economics of that is like when you have an executive pastry chef, a sommelier, a really amazing head chef, coffee expert. Like there's just
that's
like
a lot of salaries.
They're just pulling out all the stops and clicking on every level. So I don't know how that affected it.
It's tricky because a lot of these places, some of them are very transparent and are very open about why we're closing and whether it's an economic reason or the lease is up or their heart's not in it or whatever. But other times people don't really give a stated reason, whether on social media or they decline to comment when we call or something like that. And so it's tricky because you never want to speculate on what you don't know the inner workings of a business like that. You never want to speculate. But Reed's did have it had a 4+ years, which when you think about the lifespan of a lot of restaurants,
it's actually pretty good.
That's actually pretty good.
Especially fine dining.
Exactly, especially fine dining, and with a wine program like that and a menu like that, it definitely had a longer run than some restaurants, than a lot of startup restaurants. So
let's talk also about Publico. You'd mentioned that earlier as one of these really acclaimed restaurants. People loved this, and yet they had a run that I think was shorter than Reed's.
It was around the same. They also opened in 2015. They were on our best new restaurants list in 2015, number 1. And, Mike Randolph garnered a Best Chef Midwest semifinalist nomination from the James Beard Awards. And they had a really distinct point of view. To me, I think in their statement, they said, we tried to do something really different, encouraged people to, go to their favorite restaurants and go often because that's what keeps them in business. But I think in that case, just in my opinion, and we talk about this sometimes, sometimes the restaurant doesn't always seem exactly right for the neighborhood that they're in. And I thought, again, I don't want to speculate, but I felt like, the neighborhood and people weren't going to that restaurant as often as they should have to sustain it.
And that's down at the sort of the edge of the loop, and the edge of the loop that had been hard hit. I feel like there's part of the loop, the eastern part of the loop, seems to be doing pretty well down by the pageant, and on the western end of the loop, there's just been a lot of closings.
It was definitely one of the only finer dining concepts in a strip of largely fast casual kind of concepts that really catered to the WashU student crowd. I think another reason, and they did state this when they posted on Facebook that they were closing, they said, with that said, the restaurant scene is changing, and it's important to frequent the restaurants that you love. And this is something that I moderate our Facebook page. And so I see all the comments when they come in. And a lot of the comments on closings are, oh, no, we never got to go back after that one time. Or, oh, no, we never made it. And you got to dine out at places if you want them to succeed. You can't go once a year. And I think that's a big thing is people lament these places closing that they've only been to once in 2 years. And that's not enough to sustain a business. And so I really think that's a big reason, or a big thing that I wish people would know, is you've got to go out and support these places if you really want them to succeed.
At the same time, the industry really is changing. One of our producers found an article in The Atlantic, and it says, in 2020, more than half of restaurant spending is projected to be off-premise. That's not inside a restaurant. According to the investment group Cowen and Company, off-premise spending will account for as much as 80% of the industry's growth in the next 5 years. That's people picking up takeout. And so for a place like Publico or a place like Reed's that's a little fancier, that's probably not their business model.
We were just talking about this.
Yeah, well, Danny Meyer, who's a famous restaurateur, St. Louis native, Shake Shack is like his big business. He came to a panel at WashU to discuss restaurants and business and leadership, and he mentioned, you can't change the location or the underlying economics of a business, but you can change everything else, concept, menu, redesign. When we see that, we see red flags. But he also said, like, sometimes the environment changes where, like, Grubhub and Uber Eats comes up and your clientele is suddenly deciding between convenience or experience. And a lot of times in this day and age, people are choosing convenience. And, you know, a place like Brazzi's that opened 26 years ago wasn't anticipating this type of economy when they first opened, and unless you're quickly able to adapt to that, it can really affect your bottom line.
You mentioned Brazzi's. That's another of this year's closings that I think was surprising because they had been there for so long. But I want to make sure we get to two places where, yes, they've closed, but there is some good news. One of them is Goody Goody Diner. Tell us, what's the state of what's happening? What closed them and why might they be back?
Well, they had been open for 70 years. They had changed ownership, and a really terrible, like, electric fire broke out, and nobody got hurt, but I think they announced that they were going to temporarily close, and that was in April. When we called today, they still are on their machine saying that they're temporarily closed, so we don't really know what the update is, but as far as I can tell, like, the hope is that they are planning to, but there's no real update.
Okay.
Yeah, their social media said the same thing when I checked it too, that they are still planning to reopen, but there's no word yet on when that will be.
I mean, that's a question of insurance. Like, how does is it the right amount? I don't know. You never know. And I mean, we love that diner though.
Yeah,
it's
people
an
really
amazing
want
place.
that to come back.
Yeah.
70
70
years.
years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, here we were saying 4 years is a long time. 70 years.
You have some
is a long
staying
time.
power at that point.
Yes. Now, here, this kind of leads into some other news this month. Winslow's home. I know a lot of people were sad when this closed, but this was not a closure that was, hey, we're done.
This was a really interesting closure / reopening. So Winslow's Winslow's home was a longtime restaurant in U City that closed but was purchased by Michael and Tara Galena, who own Vicia in the Central West End. Very
one of the best
nationally
restaurants in the
acclaimed, locally acclaimed, one of our best new restaurants from 2 years ago, the best new restaurant from 2 years ago.
Yes.
And they purchased that space and that concept and reopened it with sort of their twist on it as Winslow's Table. So it literally just opened last week. It's going to be breakfast and lunch. And they're really sort of trying to honor the spirit of the old restaurant, but with their take on it. So you can get a lot of the sort of vegetable forward dishes that they're known for, particularly on their lunch menu at Vicia. Things like salads and sandwiches and tartines. But they're also doing like a brisket sandwich, which I know Winslow's was very much known for their brisket sandwich. They're doing their version of it. They're also offering breakfast all day for breakfast and lunch. And then they are eventually planning to add dinner service. So they've changed from the counter service to table service.
That's interesting. They're kind of going against the direction.
Right. And I think they're just sort of trying a different concept and seeing how it works. But I do like that they're sort of honoring the spirit of that restaurant and working with the farm that Winslow's had. They're still working with that farm to really just kind of put their spin on a different iteration of that restaurant, because it was definitely a neighborhood favorite. That was another one where I watched the comments and half of them were super excited and the other half were, no, my favorite. It was an interesting conversation.
And do you think the people who liked the old vibe, do you think they're going to be happy with the new vibe?
I hope so. I think what a lot of people were who liked that space liked the retail aspect of it and the general store aspect, and that is no longer
gone.
there. They do have some grab and go options, but it's specifically food. It's not necessarily like the books and the kitchen items and things like that. That is.
But if
gone
anybody
away.
was going to take over that space, the Galenas are going to do such a great job. That
Neighborhood should not be complaining.
they're
They're very
have
lucky.
a great experience.
Right, and if you were going there for the food, I don't think you're going to be disappointed in any way.
It seems like that's the one silver lining of these sad closures.
And most people go to restaurants for the food, so I'm not too worried there.
But like we said, a lot of these closures, like we talked about Publico, they're getting ready to open up their new restaurant, Original J's Tex-Mex Barbecue in U City. Hero Asian Kitchen closed, and he ended up opening a car. So, there are bright spots when they close.
New projects happen.
Yeah, new projects will happen, are going to happen, and you'll be back next month to talk about all those. So,
yes, we will.
Catherine Klene and Meera Nagarajan of Sauce Magazine, thank you so much for joining us today. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
St. Louis Public Radio's The Gateway gives you the day's news first thing every weekday morning. From the ever-evolving relationship between St. Louis City and County to developments in the Missouri and Illinois state capitals and reports from our correspondents in Rolla and the Metro East. We put it all in a roughly 10-minute package with clarity and context. Download The Gateway wherever you get podcasts.